Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to this virtual Creator Credit Summit hosted by DDEX. We very much hope that you and yours are all safe and well in these rather strange and alarming times. My name is Mark Isherwood, and I am part of the DDEX Secretariat. We're very grateful to you for joining us for what we're sure will be an interesting and thought-provoking set of keynotes, presentations, panels over the next 3 days. I know that DDEX is familiar to many of you who are attending today, but equally there are many who are not so familiar. Therefore, I'm going to provide an introduction to DDEX, its standards, and then explain some of the focus of this virtual Creator Credit Summit. So, DDEX is an open and not-for-profit membership standards development organization, which was formed in 2006. It is open in terms of membership to all who demonstrate a business interest in digital media content. At the moment, we have roughly 110 members that come from sectors from right across the music industry. Those are musical work rights owners and administrators, recording rights owners and administrators, digital music retailers and technology service providers, and increasingly companies who operate one way or another in the studio environment. You can see the full member list at that link that's on the slide. DDEX's mission basically is focused primarily on the first of these, although we do work in other areas as well, as I'll explain. Fundamentally, we develop standard message formats for the exchange of information between business partners within the digital music marketplace. As well as those actual formats, we create choreographies which determine which order the messages should be sent and received around specific types of business transactions. And then finally, we create communication protocols which determine how those messages are actually physically sent. Most of the time, until relatively recently, that's been using secure FTP sites, but increasingly we're moving the actual communication protocols to more automated environment using web services. DDEX also works closely with a lot of other standards organizations, particularly those that are responsible for unique identification systems. And we work with them to offer any help that we can in improving the use of those identification systems. And where necessary, we will develop unique identification systems ourselves, and we are actually working on something along those lines as we speak. And then finally, our conversations usually turn to metadata quality at some point or another. And clearly where we can, we create best practice ideas and activity of that nature to try and improve the quality of metadata across the industry and the general consistency. And so the three areas that I've talked about really fit together like three cogs here. And the different elements of the standards create a much more efficient way of communicating data along the value chain. And that is very much the reason that we are in existence. In terms of its operation, DDEX is pretty much like any other standards body. We have a number of technical working groups, and these come together to set requirements for work that needs to be done, and then review proposed solutions to meet those requirements. And they go through an iterative process of work until such time as the solution has been hammered out sufficiently that everybody is happy with it, and it can then move on to become an official standards. All of the meetings for the working groups primarily are telephone conferences or webinars. And we obviously have other support, things like sharing documents online. Clearly, in these COVID times, the amount of that type of work has increased significantly in order to keep everything moving forward. We also hold, when we can, physical plenary meetings. These usually happen twice a year. Clearly, that's not the case at the moment, but we did last week have a series of sessions across the week as substitute for our normal plenary meeting, which normally takes place in the second week of November. When we are meeting physically, we currently rotate the location between the East Coast and West Coast of North America and Europe. And the plenary meetings review the work that the working groups have been doing, and then basically pull together a list of work activities for the following 6 months. We also occasionally meet physically where one week working group has a particularly large agenda that it needs to get through, which can't be done on 1.5 to 2 hour telephone conferences. The main thing about DDEX, and the one thing I think DDEX is very proud of, is that the atmosphere and the approach in which this work carries on is very much collegiate, and formally we work on the basis of consensus. We try to get unanimity and very often succeed, but where that is not the case, decisions are made on consensus. And as I said, the atmosphere within DDEX and the working groups and the plenary meetings is extremely collegiate, even though some of the companies represented may well in other circumstances, in other arenas, be in quite serious dispute. As I mentioned, DDEX is a membership organization, and we have 3 categories of members. The first and the highest are the charter members, and they can send their employees to attend all of the working group meetings that I've mentioned, the plenary meetings, and also the annual meeting that we have. They may provide working group chairs if they so wish, and in common with all of the layers of membership that we have, they can comment on what we call a committee draft. This is the sort of penultimate step before a standard becomes formal and published, and all of the members are in a position to provide comments on that before finalization of the standard. And then finally, as far as charter members are concerned, they may nominate a board member to act as director on their behalf, and they pay the flat fee of $27,035 per annum. The next layer down is full members, and essentially they get exactly the same benefits as charter members, except that they do not appoint a director to the board. And the fees for membership there are revenue-based on an annual basis, and obviously where your revenue fits, you pay the fee for that band. And then finally, we have associate members. These don't actually participate in the work, but they do have access to the documentation so that they can review it as they go along. And in common with full and charter members, they can comment on the committee drafts. They can also attend the annual meeting and the plenary meetings under certain circumstances, and for that they pay a flat fee of $2,675. And to just give you an indication of the type of membership we have, here is a list of the companies that represent musical works owners and administrators on the DDEX board. Clearly, you will see major collective rights organizations for authors' rights, as well as Cobalt Music publishing as well. And then similarly, on the recording rights owners administrators, we have the 3 major labels and 3 organizations, music licensing companies, PPL, CCPP from France, and Sound Exchange that administer rights for sound recordings and performers. And then most recently, Downtown Music Holdings, which has major interest in distributors of content to the DSPs. And finally, the retailers and technology service providers are pretty much household names, and Amazon, Google, Spotify, Apple, Pandora, and Tencent Music from China. The whole governance of the organization then comes together in this way. The charter members provide board members who appoint an executive board. The executive board oversee the secretariat. The charter members and the full members then provide employees to work in the plenary and the working groups. And as I've indicated, the associate members have access to certain of the documentation. And it's the Secretariat's job, along with the technical management group, which sort of oversees the technical work overall, to keep the engine running. And that's how the governance of the organization holds together. One other aspect I would mention, we have the concept within DDEX of liaison organizations. And these are usually trade associations or other standards bodies who have a common interest in the whole area of activity that DDEX is working on. And depending on the exact nature of the agreement they sign, they can send representatives on behalf of their own members to the plenary meetings and working groups, particularly if they have subject matter experts. I'm thinking particularly around identifier systems like ISRC or ISWC. They will have a very clear voice within what DDEX is doing. Liaison organizations can also comment on committee drafts, and we work with them to communicate publicly available data to their own constituents who may not feel able to be members of DDEX directly. At the moment, we have some 15 liaison organizations covering a whole raft of different interests, both corporate and individual, and we are spending an increasing amount of time talking to associations whose interest is around creators and performers, and hope to see some of those become liaison organizations with DDEX in the future. So that's a little bit of background about DDEX itself. Now I would like to talk about the standards. Underpinning all of our standards is the DDEX data dictionary. It is our lingua franca, and very often these days, if you don't speak DDEX, getting information from business partners is going to be tricky. And DDEX is sometimes compared to a language, in that a sender of a DDEX message needs to map their database to the relevant fields within the message. And then when the receiver receives the message, the receiver has to map the DDEX fields into their database, which effectively allows the two companies to speak the same language, even if their two data models are different, whether fundamentally or just around the edges. So the data dictionary contains the semantics of all the terms and the structure of what we call common composites. There are a number of entities like sound recordings or musical works, which have a number of particular attributes in order to be identified. And the way that is done is by creating these composites of the various attributes that need to be communicated in order to identify whatever the entity happens to be. And these become building blocks within DDEX, and you will find that the composites are used over and over and over again in the different messages, which may actually be for different purposes, but the same underlying building blocks are very much part of the standards. So the first message or standard I want to introduce you to is the release delivery, the electronic release notification message. This is usually sent by a record company or distributor to a DSP, and it contains basic information about the sound recordings that the record company or distributor is allowing the DSP to exploit for consumers. It also contains what we call deal information, and that's basic start and end dates for the use of the individual sound recordings, and specific rate information that usually references back to an overall paper contract. Very much accompanying the ERN is that within that we have standardized the way the actual resource files are communicated. And this doesn't just involve record companies, but could involve studios. And as an activity that slightly on a junction, as you can see from this, from exploitation by DSPs, this allows the storing and the communication of the resources for the purposes of archiving. The next standard is the Media Enrichment and Description Standard, or MEAD. And what this enables is the communication of data that is not core supply chain data, or data relating to rights management issues. It is the additional data like how many awards an artist has won, what their nickname might be. It could reference journalistic texts about an album. All kinds of things of that nature are subsidiary, although I don't mean less important by saying that, to the standard supply chain data that keeps everything running between record companies and DSPs. The MEAD standard was announced about this time last year, and we're hoping in the next quarter or two to see actual implementations of that. And this is very much a part of why we're here today. This is about getting more and more data about sound recordings and musical works to the general public. And the whole creator credit activity is very much a part that leads into exchanging information through the MEAD standard. And then what you can see is that all three of these standards hang together to create a complete supply chain of standards that can be used amongst these various different parties to actually run their businesses. The similar is true of two other standards. This is the digital sales report, or sales and usage reporting. This is a standard which contains a number of profiles for the reporting of sales and usage, usually from a DSP to rights owners, be they musical work authors, rights societies, or music publishers, and indeed record companies. And there are a number of different profiles within this standard that are designed to meet the particular requirements of different types of commercial offering, whether UGC or broadcast. So there are a number of different profiles that support different business models in that context. And another standard that has been recently published is a sister standard to the digital sales report, is the claim and detailed message. This is usually sent by musical work authors, rights societies, or music publishers to DSPs. And the message is a response to a sales and usage report, providing the claims that the rights society or music publisher is making to the DSP in respect of the works that they've used as reported in a sales and usage report. And again, you can see that what that creates is a sort of virtuous circle of standards that actually enables a whole business activity to be carried out. Similarly, we have three standards that are loosely called musical work notification and licensing standards. And these were primarily developed to support the mechanical licensing process in the US. And the three steps cover musical work notification, in other words, an exchange of information between DSPs, record companies, and the rights owners about splits. The musical work licensing message, which is confirming or obtaining a license. And then very recently published the letter of direction standard, which allows rights owners to notify record companies and DSPs that there has been a change of ownership or administration of a work and that they need to alter their records accordingly. I briefly mentioned the musical work licensing companies when listing some of the board members of DDEX. As I said, these are the sorts of companies like Sound Exchange or PPL in the UK, GVL in Germany, SCPP in France, and so on. And they also need to communicate data with the organizations they represent, the record companies, and they need to communicate amongst themselves between different music licensing companies in different territories. And these standards here are being used extensively within this community, who have two sort of centralized projects. I use the word fairly loosely, RDX and VRDB2. And both of these are centralizing data in some form. And the DDEX standards are the communication mechanism by which all of the parties communicate the data with those particular projects. And then almost finally, but not quite, we have created a message that allows partners to communicate links between musical works and sound recordings that they have created. This is nothing to do with the authority of that link, but merely a mechanism whereby parties can exchange that data. And then this all fits together like this. And as you can see, the standards that DDEX now has cover a very significant part of the industry. In fact, we would say pretty much all primary business transactions now have a DDEX message or standard that enables, it can support that particular type of transaction. But the question then always arises as to where does all this data originate from? And that's really why we're here. And this is the recording information notification standard in the light blue green line, primarily created for the collection of studio data as near to the point of creation as possible. The RIN files can be moved around to different processes within the overall process of creating a sound recording or a group of sound recordings. And it was originally conceived as a mechanism of getting this data to record companies. But as you will hear, no doubt today and over the next 3 days, it can also be used to communicate this early creation data to any other sort of organization that plays a part in the administration of musical works and sound recordings. So I'm very conscious that I've already provided you with a fairly serious acronym soup, and I'm going to try and slightly unravel that by looking at the three standards that I think are very relevant to the creator credits. In a way, the electronic release notification standard is the last message along the continuum. The senders of these are record companies and distributors, and the receivers are usually DSPs. And the data contained is going to be about the releases, the tracks, the main artists, the track durations, and so on, but also the deal information. The next step up from that is the media enrichment and description standard. The senders here will be record companies, distributors, or metadata companies, and the receivers will be DSPs. And they will provide very different type of data about the releases that are communicated using ERN. For example, what a focused track is, an artist's nickname, lyrics, and chart positions, and so on. But as I have indicated, without RIN starting the process, the recording information notification standard, none of the other work can really begin. And so here, RIN is going to be creator credit platforms or digital audio workstations sending messages containing all the data to record companies, CMOs, publishers, and whoever else needs to receive it. And the sort of data that the RIN contains, and what you will hear a lot more about as we go through our 3 sessions, is session information, which is the event when a sound recording or musical work is created. And that will be things like the location, the time when the session took place. All of the parties, so the individuals or groups that contributed in any way to the creation of the music, described using their name, a unique identifier if that's available, because obviously that's very valuable, and any contact information should that be necessary. The RIN also can communicate equipment, whether that's simply the musical instruments being used or the actual technical equipment like the microphone type. And this can be communicated either with simple name or if the available serial number information can also be communicated. The other aspect, of course, of a new creation is the musical work. So the RIN can carry information about the musical work, usually described by its title and its writers, and if possible, a unique identifier. The recording components of the various different elements of an overall sound recording, and which eventually are put together to create the sound recording that's distributed to consumers. And the resources are the individual sound recording, of which there may be many versions, again described by a title or list of parties. The RIN can also carry project information. This is usually associated with a whole group of sound recordings, and this may often be for accounting or artistic reasons, and usually that will be some sort of reference number. Then there are elements which are specific configurations of a sound recording, like a multi-track master or mixed master version. And the files, these are the actual files containing the music information and that which is associated with the project. They can be in any type, but are usually audio, image, or data files. The RIN only contains information about the file itself. It doesn't actually contain the file. But what you can see from that is the RIN enables the communication of a vast amount of information and metadata that can help start the process within the whole supply chain relating to ensuring the right people get paid and get credited. So we are here at the Creator Credit Summit, so let's focus on that and really the sort of thing that we will be talking about as the time goes by. For those of you who are old enough to remember, I know it's made a comeback, but I'm talking about the original vinyl. Clearly those sleeves gave ample space for all the credits to be listed and for lyrics as well. And even when we moved to CDs, the jewel cases would contain booklets that contained exactly the same information as was available on an LP sleeve. There would even be some data that's relevant to creator credits on the label of the vinyl itself. In this case, we've got writer credits and publisher credits on the label. And with apologies to Sony and to Spotify, because this is a quite an old screenshot. One of the reasons we are here, that's up until the last year or two, very often on a service, this is about the limit of the metadata that would be available to consumers. And if you compare that back to the metadata that was available in CD booklets and on vinyl covers, that really is quite a gap. And so what DDEX is trying to do with the RIN standard and with the events like this is to build up activity towards collecting all this data as early as possible in the creation process, so that it comes into the supply chain and ensures the right people get paid and credited. And so remember that metadata is a love note to the future, and that is what we are talking about today.